So what we're going to cover today is what happens when smart capture and workflow excellence get together. So we're going to talk about an actual use case, talk about the problems that we're solving, and then have a nice offer for you at the end of this presentation. So I'll get right into that. I'm Sabrina Stratford. I'm the Business Development Manager for Effisoft. And what that role is managing our strategic partnerships such as Nintex. And we have complementary solutions that give you power over processes. So as Ryan and I were talking, we understood that it was time to show everyone what we can do now that they've made acquisitions of Foxtrot and even ProMap. So it's time to kind of revisit our offering and educate our audience. Ryan is having, okay. Are you here, Ryan?
I am indeed, yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so Ryan's in London, and so that's why we were a little concerned about his ability to get in. So Ryan and I go way back. I've known him for a few years now, and Ryan, I have to say this is the most interesting title that I've ever seen you have, so if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure, would love to. So my name is Ryan Duguid. I'm the Chief Evangelist at Nintex. Chief Evangelist involves spending time with customers and partners, understanding their unique needs and challenges they're facing, and helping them map Nintex solutions and capabilities into those needs. It's also key to get out there and spend time with those people and bring their feedback in to influence our product roadmap and overall strategy.
Excellent. Okay. And Sean, were you able to get into this bridge? Okay, so Sean's still dialing in and we'll make that work. That's okay. So Sean Reed is our Senior Enterprise Solutions Architect, and we're going to call on him whenever we get to the demonstration portion of this presentation. So continuing on, so the problem that we're solving for, it's overwhelming data. You know, we read about it all the time that it's growing at a 10x rate per year. So now we're moving into zettabytes. And I actually had to go Google what a zettabyte is. It's 1,000 exabytes, and an exabyte has more zeros than I could actually count in terms of bytes. So we're moving into the zettabytes now, and what that means is a lot of hands for data entry. And so in fact, companies are spending $5.8 billion on data entry jobs, and that at its very heart is what digital transformation solves for. Because we know what problems it creates whenever people are having to handle the data and do data entry. So let's take a look at the trends in the market. No matter where you're at in your digital transformation, we know that expectations from our customers or even our constituents in the public sector space, they expect to be able to find us online. They expect to be able to sit in front of Netflix and pay bills or get an insurance quote or renew a license. So no matter where we're at in our digital transformation, our customers are very, very much advanced. And the enterprise has learned that the best way to accomplish this is by working with best of breed solutions, as opposed to being locked down and locked into a legacy workflow or capture solution that doesn't work with other best of breed solutions. So the expectation is to work with vendors that can offer open APIs, low-code cloud solutions, and solve the problem. So the key is reducing the need for manual processing and data entry, and increasing and providing insight. So we're having to do more with less, every enterprise is, and beyond that, we want to be able to free up people to get away from this rote data entry. So what we thought we would do is have Ryan speak to an actual use case, a real life use case. So Ryan?
Sure. You know, at the end of the day, what everybody's laser focused on in this day and age is this concept of digital transformation. And when we think about digital transformation, typically what's happening is people are looking for obvious, highly visible wins, and they're not necessarily thinking through everything that happens from end to end in terms of interacting with customers, partners, stakeholders, and the likes. And so, you know, to really highlight this, I want to give everyone an example of a recent experience I had renewing passports for my youngest son. He's an 11-year-old. Now, he has a good fortune of holding dual nationality, and I had the misfortune of letting both his passports lapse at once. And so we set about getting them renewed. And on the one hand, he's a New Zealand citizen. On the other hand, he's a United States citizen. And so off we went and down to the passport office. And, the high level here is that one passport turned up in the US in approximately 3 days or so, and the other one turned up in approximately 6 weeks. Now, you might be thinking, well, New Zealand's a smaller country, so perhaps that's the one that took the longest. But the reality was the US passport was the one that took 6 weeks, and the New Zealand one was the one that took 3 days. So, how did that happen? Well, option one, the experience for the New Zealand citizen is that most citizens can apply for their passport online. And so you do that with no paper, no postage, and no visits to an office. You simply go to the website, fill in a form, upload a digital image, and the passport turns up shortly afterwards. Now, on the other hand, to get that US passport, you go to the website, you download a PDF form, you fill it in by hand, you go to the local photo shop and get a physical photo, a passport photo. You then head in with your existing passport to the local courthouse. You go through a security screening machine as part of that experience, and the long day wears on. And so someone manually validates all of your information, you give them a paper-based check, and a long time later, things turn up. Now, this is two, black and white examples, but the reality is most situations are a little more blendy than that. And more often than not, what we're seeing is what I would call the classic case of the iceberg principle. And the iceberg principle is really the notion that what everybody sees is a tiny little piece, typically about 10%, sitting above the surface. That's a highly visible component of any problem. But the real problem potentially lies under the surface. And so for the iceberg, typically 10% is above the water and 90% is under. And so when you think about the experience of the customer, in this case at that passport office, oftentimes what happens is people focus on that first touch. When they're actually interacting with a person, when they're capturing information from them, that's the part the customer sees and where we focus our efforts. But what we're ignoring is what really goes on behind the scenes. We're often failing to look for the real improvements, the real things that will help provide a seamless end-to-end experience. And so the question becomes, why is that? And when we try to answer the question, why is this happening, we look at the reality of the tip of the iceberg. Now, what's happening oftentimes is that these are highly visible projects and they have a lot of dollars associated with them, sales dollars, marketing dollars. And as a result, that tends to attract big software, big consulting engagements, a high spend. And these are often very high complexity solutions. And there's a handful of them and they tend to be built by professional developers. And that's all well and good, but that's just dealing with that surface level experience. Now, what happens if you provide a phenomenal experience for a customer at face value, but then behind the scenes, everything starts to come unstuck? And that's typically where we see a lot of the problems, but also huge opportunity to truly digitally transform an organization. And so how do you achieve that? Well, the reality is to drive digital transformation at scale, you need a combination of capabilities, but it's capabilities designed in a particular way for a particular set of people. At the end of the day, you need digital process automation, some robotic process automation, smart capture, electronic forms, mobile applications, document automation, some artificial intelligence to really start to have an impact at scale and to solve all the process problems within your organization, to really truly automate as much as we possibly can. And where we can't automate things, make sure that people are carrying out tasks and making decisions as quickly and as effectively as possible. And so to do that, we can then deliver a true end-to-end customer experience. But when I use the term customer, you need to think holistically about what a customer actually is within your organization. Now, oftentimes when we think about customer, we're thinking about someone walking into a shop and spending money. That's one definition. But for you, a customer could be your partner in your organization, could be an employee, could be a patient in a clinic, a member of a club, an attendee at a conference, perhaps a vendor, supplier, a visitor to your facilities. Maybe you're a government agency and it's a citizen. So when you think broadly about customer, you really need to understand how do you deliver a seamless end-to-end experience for them? How do you simplify their customer journey in interacting with you for your product or service, whether they're internal or external to your organization? So in terms of simplifying that customer journey, what we're really talking about is how we take inputs from that customer, the process we apply to those inputs, and then the outcomes we deliver as a result. Now, one thing I can tell you is that if you have poor input, if you have poor processes, then the reality is you're going to deliver poor outcomes. The expression I've always heard is garbage in, garbage out. If you're an audiophile, it's the classic case of having, a high-end amplifier, but plugging in a poor device instead of having a high-end CD or other type of player attached to it. But if you flip that around and you focus on delivering great input and great process, then you're well positioned to start to deliver great outcomes. And that's really what we want to talk about today when we talk about how we bring together smart capture and workflow excellence to deliver that holistic end-to-end great customer experience. And obviously the scenario we're anchoring this in is invoice processing. And so with that said, Sabrina, back to you to talk a little bit about smart capture and how that can help drive more effective end-to-end process and customer journey.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. So this is the Effisoft piece. When we talk about best of breed, we've got the two partners working here together, Nintex and Effisoft, and this is the Effisoft piece. And we take a unique approach that reduces costs, improves accuracy, and provides access to the trapped information in a way that hasn't been possible before with your legacy capture solutions. And it doesn't matter if this is finance, insurance, we work with health records, government, certainly the accounts payable and invoicing, mailrooms, manufacturing, logistics, you name it. Smart capture includes all the on-ramps. So someone loading up a scanner with a pile of disparate document types. It can be contracts to invoices, and they're expecting straight through processing. And with Effisoft, we don't require separator pages. We can take attachments in email, mobile documents, faxes, file folders. Smart Capture tightens everything up and it gets it ready to automatically process. So we're smart enough to know the difference between a contract and a difference between an invoice. And based on that document classification, we can take a different journey. So then we rip out the data that you need for that process. So for example, it might be a customer name, an invoice amount, and then we give a knowledge worker a chance to take a look at that if they want to and validate that extracted data. And then off it goes to Nintex for a workflow. It can go off to a robot, go do a dance with Foxtrot, can go to an ERP system, SharePoint repository, or Box, or wherever it needs to go. So when you think about the human error we're avoiding and how many people can go do other more important things, and that's when you think about showing a hard dollar return or the investment to get budget. So Ryan, let's talk a little bit about your piece of the best of breed.
Sure. So, when you get that great input through smart capture, through bringing in that information and making sure you're extracting all the right data, you're doing it as quickly and as efficiently as possible, you're handling exceptions, you then look at the process behind that. And when you think about process, there's really three things you need to keep in mind. One, you need to identify, document, and carefully manage your processes. Make sure everyone agrees on what's being done and it's the most efficient thing that can be done within your organization. After that, you need to look for automation potential. Where can you accelerate cycle times? Where can you reduce wait times within your process? And you do that through a combination of capabilities, electronic forms and mobile workflow with our Foxtrot RPA capabilities, and then all the way out through automated document generation and Nintex e-sign to get quotes, contracts, proposals, and the like signed and approved. After that, you optimize things. That's about monitoring what's going on, looking for ways to improve things with time, and then you get a virtuous cycle where you can keep coming back, improving the documentation, improving the automation, and then constantly delivering a better outcome for your customers. And with that, I think it's time to see a live demonstration of a solution that can help you accelerate the customer journey when it comes to invoice processing.
You bet. So what we've chosen is a use case that I think everyone can relate to because virtually everyone has an accounts payable department. And a lot of our customers start here to prove out a solution because it's really a no-brainer. Like I mentioned, you can take the average processing time of an invoice that costs $14 when you look at the overall cost of an invoice down to $2.52. So again, your return on investment and a way to find budget, this is the no-brainer. So we're going to have Sean start with our demo. Sean, were you able to take control?
Okay, Sabrina, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
All right, well, sounds great then. So let me just go ahead and share my screen and we can work on this demonstration. Actually, Sabrina, if you stop sharing, then I'll be able to.
Yeah, it shows that John has control. I'll stop that there. There you go.
That is me. Thank you. All right, sounds good. Can you see my screen with Foxtrot now?
Looks great.
All right, well, great. Thank you very much, Sabrina. So what we're looking at right now is the Foxtrot Designer. So this is the tool that we could use to build out robots and workflows to improve efficiency and automation for business processes. Now, as Sabrina mentioned earlier, what we're going to look at is an invoice demonstration. So this is a Foxtrot workflow that ingests a document via email. It submits that document to FSOF Transact, and then it receives the extracted data back from Transact, and then uses that extracted data to build an invoice record in NetSuite. Now, in a production environment, we'd configure this workflow to actually monitor the email inbox and trigger the workflow automatically. But we simplified things a bit for this webinar. We're just going to trigger this workflow by hand. Now, the slider at the bottom that we see here actually controls the speed of the workflow. So if we set this to its highest setting all the way to the right, then many of the robot actions that you see in the interface will actually be too fast to see. So we've actually slowed down the speed a little bit of the workflow so that we can actually talk about some of the various steps that we see during the webinar. So I can start this workflow by clicking the play button at the bottom here. And then once this kicks off, I'll talk about some of the actual steps that are taking place here. So our goal with the workflows here is to enable as much of a straight-through processing as possible. But we also want to show how easy it is to handle exceptions that may occur during that processing. So for the purposes of the webinar today, we've actually chosen a document that we know is going to have some issues. We know that it's going to stop in one of our validation queues, or I'm sorry, in our validation interface, which is one of our exception handling areas. Now you can see in this case, the system has actually started to process the file. It's submitted the document to Transact, and now the robot is actually connecting to Transact through the browser and is starting to log in. Now you can see in the workflow tool here that in the Foxtrot Designer that the system's going to go step by step through all of those pieces of the workflow. Now, in this case, you can see that the batch has actually appeared. It's sitting in the validation queue. It's waiting for a user to take a look at it. Now, in a production environment, we would do things slightly differently. We would configure the workflow to actually notify the user via email whenever they have a batch that needs to be addressed. But to simplify things here again, we've just had the workflow tool load the browser up and take us directly to this screen. So let me go ahead and hit the validate or hit the open button here. And this is going to open the standard FSOF Transact validation interface. So in this case, we can see that I've got a single invoice as my document that's been processed, and I've got a handful of index fields in the center. Now, off on the right-hand side, we also have the larger preview of the document that was being processed. Now, we've got a couple of different colors that I want to talk about here. We've got some fields that are white. We've got some fields that are red that are blank. And we've also got a field that's red that is populated. Now, this is just standard FSOF Transact right now. Now, obviously, in an invoice environment, we expect every invoice to have an invoice number. So this is a mandatory field. Now, the fact that it's blank right now is the reason why it's red. Now, in an invoicing world, PO numbers are great if you have one. If you can capture it, that's great. right? But if you don't have one, we're not going to make this batch stop in validation. We're not going to make this field red because the PO number is missing. So obviously, if we look over here for the invoice number, you can see that the system actually does have an invoice, or this document does have an invoice number, but you can see that it looks like somebody spilled some coffee on the top right corner of this document, and that obscured the number. Now, the system wasn't able to OCR that correctly because of the coffee stain, but a human operator like myself can take a look at this and see that that actually is a 7322 that's hiding behind that part of the stain. So when I start to type that value in, you'll notice that as soon as I get to 4 digits here, that field goes from red to white. And the reason for that is that we have what we call a validation rule in place on that field. And that validation rule allows us to control what kinds of patterns and values are allowed to get through the system. Now here in this case, we've configured it just to say that an invoice number has to be at least 4 characters. Obviously, in your environment, we may be able to configure that a little more tightly to get more accurate patterns. Now we also have one other thing that needs to be addressed here, and that's this amount in the bottom. Now, if I click around here, you'll notice that as soon as I click in that field, the highlighting in the bottom right corner of the preview moves to where that location is. Now, in this case, the reason why this particular field is red is just because the confidence score that was calculated by the system when it did its extraction was lower than the confidence threshold that we wanted it to achieve. So it's really saying that I want a human operator to come in and make sure that this is the right thing. So obviously this $50 is really what that value is. I can get past that problem by clicking the validate button once, which will change that from red to white. And if I click it again, it will actually submit this batch to the next stage of the workflow within Transact. So let me hit OK there. And it's going to look to automatically go to the next batch, but there's no other batches for the user to process here. So now you'll see that the workflow has automatically picked up where it left off. You can see it continues to go through the rest of these steps on the right-hand side, and it's actually starting to open a document in Excel. Now, what Transact did at that point, when it completed the extraction process and it got through validation, it built a CSV file that contained all of the values that were extracted. And you can see some of those values off on the left-hand side here. We've got the identifier of doc1, we've got the amount of $50, the terms and subtotal, and so on. Now, what the workflow is doing here is looping through that Excel file column by column. You can see it's on 9, 10, 11. You can see that it's actually going through their column by column, pulling those values out, and then building its own file to actually submit to NetSuite. Now, as it gets to the end of this loop, you'll see that it can get down to the next section here, and we have a note here saying that this is working with NetSuite. Now we're in 17, 18. We should be done in a moment here.
Hey, Sean, we actually had a question come up that's relevant to what's going on the screen right now. Just the basic, what is Foxtrot? So, Ryan, do you mind addressing that?
Sure. So Foxtrot is an RPA platform. Nintex recently closed the acquisition of a company called EnableSoft, and they've spent many, many years now in the RPA business. RPA, for those who are not familiar with it, is robotic process automation. It's essentially taking the concept of workflow that you might be familiar with, but moving it down onto the desktop, moving it inside the firewall, and enabling it to talk to legacy line of business systems that don't have modern REST-based APIs. And so what you're essentially doing is instructing the robot in the same way as you would define a typical process in a digital process automation platform, what steps you wanted to carry out on behalf of a person. And so in the example we've seen, we were essentially picking up an invoice. We were sending that invoice off to Fsoft for processing. Fsoft was giving us back a structured data payload. The robot was then parsing that information out of Excel in the same way a person would, but at a much faster speed. And now it's launched the browser. It's opened up NetSuite, our ERP system. And you can see on the screen right now, what it's doing is it's actually interacting with all the controls, those form fields in NetSuite, and it's creating the invoice in our NetSuite system. First, it's populating a set of the high-level information. Where does this invoice come from? And then it's going through line by line, adding up those invoice line items. When all that's said and done, what you can see now is the robot on the screen is running through the system. It's starting to clean up. It's getting rid of a bunch of the files and the likes that have been created and used during this process. And eventually, it'll complete all its tasks and it'll go back to sleep. And so essentially what we've been able to do is take that manual work, that repetitive work that was being done by a person in our organization, We've dramatically improved the throughput, the accuracy of it. We've leveraged the smart capture capabilities on the FSOF side. And then that person is freed up to focus on higher value tasks, within their finance and administration organization.
Excellent. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Ryan. So that is the end of the demonstration portion of the workflow. I'm going to stop sharing and send things back to Sabrina.
Great. Thank you. All right, so just wrapping up, and we had another question. Where can I find more information on how we work with other ERP systems? So yes, it's not just NetSuite. We can work with virtually any line of business system. So you can look on our respective websites, either nentex.com or effisoft.com. But we also have a nice offer for you here. We want to review a process at no charge and kind of maybe build out a demo like you just saw in your own space. So in conclusion, we've got lower cost, better customer service, healthier security and compliance. And most of all, what we want to share with you is that our guiding principle is that our entire organization believes in your customer success, and we want to help with that. So if you just reach out to Ryan or myself, we can review a process for you. And we've got like 3 minutes to answer any more questions. So let me check here and see what else we have. So yes, we will be sharing this PowerPoint presentation, but you need to send us an email, if you would, to one of the email addresses on the screen, and we'll send you the recording.